Hello and welcome back to Create and Activate. As you'll see, this episode is not our usual format. I'm not joined by John today as he's sunning himself in Mexico. Today's bonus episode is a live webinar featuring TrunkBBI's Head of Creative Technology, Oisin Wood, and Brown-Forman's Senior Customer Marketing Manager, Adam White. It was a live session with audience interaction, but it was recorded via Zoom, so it's not to our usual high production value. I hope you enjoy. Okay, good morning everyone and welcome to the Gamifying ROI webinar. I'm Adam Britton, MD here at TrunkBBI. Before I introduce the other Adam and Oz, I'll run through a little bit about what we're going to cover today. So first of all, I hope you'll be happy to know that today's webinar won't be death by PowerPoint. We like to keep things conversational and interactive. We have prepared some slides with the information on that will be shared with you after the event, but we don't want to bore you with 100 slides of text this morning. I did mention interactive, and that goes for yourselves as well. If you do have any questions at all, please feel free to ask them in the comments section, and I'll get to them as and when we're going through. Alternatively, we'll make sure we get to everyone's at the end. Before I introduce who TrunkBBI are, I'll pass you over to Oz, who is going to introduce himself.
I'm Oz, or Oisin. I'm Head of Creative Tech at TrunkBBI. I've been involved in creative tech space for the last 13 years, producing all sorts of different interactive and experiences for customers.
Brilliant, thanks Oz. And Adam?
Morning everyone. So I'm Adam. I am the Customer Marketing Manager at Brown-Forman. For those who don't know Brown-Forman, we are a premium spirits business. We own premium spirits such as Jack Daniel's, Woodward Reserve, El Jimador, to name a few. I've been working kind of within the sector for around about 8 years, and been working with kind of TrunkBBI over the last kind of 4 or 5 years, working on some really exciting, great activations around gamification. So looking forward to today's session and talking a little bit about it.
Thanks, Adam. And as I mentioned at the start, I'm also Adam, MD here at TrunkBBI, the home of Create and Activate. We're a full service agency specializing in strategy, insights, content production, and performance marketing. Everything we produce is by our in-house production team, from film and animation right through to creative technology, which we're obviously here to talk about this morning. So let's get into it and start with the elephant in the room. What is gamification and is it what people think it is? Oz.
Well, yeah, I'm going to jump in straight on that. And I think there's a bit of a myth surrounding the definition of gamification. It's not just releasing the next big game. It's more about taking the best parts of a game and repurposing them into, an interactive or, a tool or even a small, sort of mini game to keep people engaged. We're not looking to make the next AAA release. We're interested in creating exciting interactives which can lead lasting repeatable entertainment value for the end user. At TrunkBBI, the ideal approach, we think we found it pretty good, is short, snappy interactions which keep people coming back for more. It helps increase redemption rates and educates the user about the brand as well.
Yeah, so the true meaning of gamification as well is almost just using gaming elements, isn't it? And bringing it into everyday life. Like I think the one big thing I always refer back to actually is Tesco Club Card. And it's not a game. It's not a game itself, but it's actually using game elements such as points collection. Even you'll be able to see how many points you've got and bringing it into everyday scenarios. And it's funny the amount of times, obviously, clients come to ourselves and say, we want to do gamification. And then they say, we want to do Pac-Man. And that's not true gamification. There's ways of being able to bring gamification into redemption, for example, and that is gamifying the redemption experience. But it's I suppose what we're going to cover today is a bit of gamification, but also actually true form games and interactives and how we can gamify that redemption, gamify customer loyalty through the use of games and interactives.
Yeah.
So, Adam, what challenges do you have in marketing to reach and engage with your audience?
I think there's kind of the way that all marketers are. We want to try and interact with consumers. We want to kind of interrupt rather than disrupt. I think there's kind of always there's a lot of people are kind of going into marketing saying, right, we want to disrupt the user's journey and we want to kind of go in, but actually we kind of want to interrupt them. We want to get our kind of brands in front of them. And there's so many different kind of pathways now in doing it. There's nothing against kind of older uses of marketing, whether that's through paper or kind of posters on a wall. But we've now come into a world that's just continually developing, and people's behaviors and habits are changing all the time. So we as marketers need to keep continually kind of evolving as well, and looking at what are the touch points and the right places, spaces, times that we can interact with consumers and drive a message. And the challenge is, what's the message we want them to do? I think there's lots of different options of it, but ultimately, how do you drive a behavior which, if it's to get them to go into a bar and buy a drink, or to get them to go into a shop and buy your product, what's the right message that you want to give them, and how can you influence them to the point which is profitable for you, rather than giving everything away, which I don't actually think we need to do anymore. It's about how do we kind of interact and influence them and give them reasons to buy, almost reasons to believe, reasons to interact, and reasons to put that brand onto the radar. And I think our challenge in marketing is, how do we keep evolving the way that technology is evolving, the way that behaviors are evolving, to make sure that we have presence in all those spaces, but respectfully, without forgetting kind of all audiences, and not kind of focusing too much on one channel, and make sure there's a real blend, as you like, of marketing, but in the right place and spaces.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So in that kind of planning phase at the beginning, if we had a look at the roadmap of, if we were producing a game or an interactive for the audience, what are the most important things to consider? I think sometimes people think creating a new mechanic that'll do everything is the answer, but often it's not, is it?
Sorry.
Okay, I was just going to say, yeah, no, definitely not. The mechanic's one thing, but before even getting into that, you've got to look at, what's the end goal of the campaign. We're not just going to make a product or a game for, or interactive for no reason. What do we want to achieve with that end goal? And I think Adam, you might have been touching on it, because you've got to understand the audience as well. I thought you were going to jump in.
It's difficult with two Adams, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Adam B and Adam B, I'll say. But yeah, the audience is important as well, because you first of all, you got to define that end goal, get that clear definition of what the product's going to be, and then what you want to achieve, and then you can start to think about who you're going to target, what the audience is, what do you want to achieve, and it's from that then you can sort of look into this, what mechanics are possible, but how big or small does it need to be?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think going into it asking for a game without kind of what the end goal is the wrong route. It's almost, how am I positioning, whether it's a promotion, a product, what's the I guess the objectives that you're touching on, and make sure that that's clear from the output and working from there, rather than going the other way and saying, we've got a great idea about a new mechanic that we might want to try, not quite sure how or where. And I think that really helps to then kind of consider what the steps we need to take in are. And then equally, I guess it goes into kind of what are the additional outputs that we can get from that? So are we going into a collection of data? Are we trying to learn more about an end consumer? Are we trying to change a habit, or are we trying to create a habit? And it's really interesting, and that's what's really exciting about kind of using things like gamification. It's really exciting because it opens new portals to what, again, going back to old methods, they just simply can't do. You can really hone down on who the person is, what you want them to do. You can learn about them, you can take that information, you can shape the outcome of the game to a certain degree. You can say whether it's the choice of drink based on the answers that they might give, or the color of a jumper that they might want to buy based on their favorite colors. It gives you all that option to really personalize an offer, which we know is the end consumer is wants that personalized feel. They don't want necessarily the very generic, for all kind of the one size fits all kind of product.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Anything to avoid in that phase, would you say?
I would jump in straight away. Yeah, when defining that mechanic, it's got to be it's very easy to admit the overcomplicated and want to build the next big thing that's going to be, wow.
Be easy to play, isn't it? Anyone should be able to pick it up, play it.
Definitely, yeah. That, simple mechanics as well is key. I mean, you've only got to look at the success of, little mini games that were released like Flappy Bird. That's just a tapping mechanic, there's flicking mechanics, tapping mechanics, swiping mechanics. It's just that nice little, easy to pick up, easy to do, but it doesn't mean it doesn't have to be challenging, but it's just that first barrier to entry.
It's an interesting one with barriers to entry as well, isn't it? On the fact that obviously I've been working in kind of games and interactives for over 10 years. And I remember probably 10 years ago, the only way to be able to get a brand to do this is you'd have to create a native app, and you'd have to create an app for iOS, Android, and you'd have to try and get people to download that app onto their phone before they can even do it. We've obviously can do it a lot easier these days. We've got web apps, we've got direct links, so it doesn't even need to touch the brand's website as well. We can do it off-site, and we don't need to be getting involved with, the agency handles it all. And the fact that you don't need to download anything and removing that barrier to entry is perfect. And as we've done it was for Brown-Forman recently, wasn't it, with the El Jimador stuff, with the AR even integrated into web. If I think back 5 years ago, 3 years ago, to think that we could do AR without having to download anything, it just shows how quickly technology is moving on.
Yeah, definitely. Especially with AR, VR, and it's all browser based now. We don't need to think about downloading anything. But equally, as well as saying, we can do all this in the browser, we want to use the most emerging tech while still supporting the most people. So that's why, in-house, we're constantly looking at different technologies to integrate and what the support of those is. So, right now, the emerging tech, I'd say, in browsers is probably Web GPU, which is like the next evolution of WebGL. And it's very exciting, it's very powerful. We can do a lot of things with it, but it's important, that we target the most people possible. We want to get it in as many hands as possible. And it's important that, as we know, we know the limitations of devices and the greatest audience we can get to.
Well, I suppose that's another thing to avoid as well, isn't it? It's actually not looking at the right browser setup. And I think we've both been there in the past where we've created an amazing interactive or game, and then because we've gone from the client's recommendation on browser, then we found out actually it needs to go into a school that uses older browsers. We've had to rewrite all of the code, and it's actually very important to understand what browsers you want to be developing on right at the very start, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Otherwise it can get very costly.
Yeah, there's so many different studies about different demographics and what devices they use and what support they have, and it can be easy not to think about that, and it's something that you really need to avoid missing, because you can make this game and then it's maybe 5% of people can use it if you've not really thought about it. I mean, Adam, you mentioned they're going into schools, like it's the similar, like, can the game be supported on whiteboards is really another one to think about, because a lot of the learning techniques are being taught in schools through gamification.
Just to add in, and without kind of over plugging Trunk, as a customer piece, I look at it and say, I'm not set up, and our business aren't necessarily set up or haven't been to go into that development or in those specialisms. I think it's really important to kind of, when you look at overcomplication, but using the expertise that kind of the agencies have in helping us to pull out kind of the help us build the picture that we're trying to create. I think it's great to have an idea and an objective, and the barrier to entry can often come from a customer side as well, as in how do we go and actually build this, and how do we create this, and what do we need to know. And actually, maybe if we don't always have the capabilities in-house, then it's going out and understanding with agencies what is the best platforms, what are the best ways for us to drive it, and what are the learnings that we can kind of create from it. So from my personal point, in terms of what to avoid, I guess, you've touched on it. I don't overcomplicate it, and always have the end consumer at heart. Like the mindset should always be, take yourself as if you were the consumer and you were sat, scrolling your phone, or if you were sat in any of the different environments where gamification, or you're being kind of interacting with a game, take yourself into it and say, how easy is this to play? How engaged am I going to be, and how relevant is it to me? and how long do I have to spend on it as well, I think is really important. If it's something that, you know, is asking you to do a 20-minute game before you kind of enter in, it's really difficult to keep that person engaged in that amount of time. You know, you've got a very small window of opportunity, I think, to engage with consumers. And I think making it snappy, making it relevant, making it, you know, if you can make it addictive, or you want it to come back to kind of reusing and getting to replay, then that's great. But equally, you need to have that real sense of, not a sense of urgency, but certainly a sense of direction and with the consumer in the mind.
Yeah, I just jump on that as well. You mentioned about the learning. It's important, not to forget about, it's a brand engagement piece. We've got to be learning about the brand, keep them on, it's the gamification piece has to be relevant to that as well. So yeah,
so what audiences engage, if we look at pure games and interactives, taking the kind of old school mentality of gamification away for a second, but games and interactives, or adver games as we used to call it back in the day, what audiences engage the most with games and interactives when it's branded?
I don't think it's much of a surprise to say that it's Gen Z. They're probably the biggest demographic which pick up gamification and can relate to it most of all. I can't remember the name, but there's a study that was done recently, which is about 70% of all Gen Z people who considered gamification the best way to generate awareness of campaigns and brands. It's a really effective marketing tool. So what we wanted to target that demographic, then gamification on interactives is a great way.
I don't know if you kind of found the same. Is it, I guess Gen Z almost peaks, doesn't it? But I think what's really interesting is mobile usage across the nation, across the world, has obviously increased a lot over the last couple of years.
I think COVID had a big part to play in that.
Yeah, it certainly did. But I think about my mum, and she probably doesn't think she's a gamer, but she's certainly not Gen Z. And she'll sit there playing Candy Crush or whatever it might be, and actually she can engage with a brand. And I think that's the thing that I always go back to. It's the fact that someone's got a smile on their face whilst they're engaging with your brand. It's not a TV advert they have to endure and sit and watch. It's the fact they're smiling. It's the fact that they're looking at that brand, and it gives that positive brand engagement that they can maybe not even associate with it at the time. But then when it comes to purchase, your brand's already ahead of your competition because they've already had that positive engagement. And actually, it's all the way from Gen Z, as you rightly say, that's the absolute peak. But I think it spans right across into my mum will kill me to say say she's the oldest of the market. She's certainly not, but I'm sure it goes past my mum as well.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think understanding the peak, but actually understanding the behavior of so many different age ranges. I think, to take as an example from a previous role, I worked for Green King. So within the pub industry, and we had a paper-based loyalty program kind of 2016-17, and we digitalized it, moved it to an app. There was a lot of older demographics were kind of keen onto that loyalty program. There was kind of quite a lot of not kickback, but there was a lot of consideration that went into moving it into a digital platform to remove kind of a paper-based program. And actually what we learned is behaviorally, we actually grew in terms of numbers of across all different age ranges as well. It wasn't just the burst in the 18-year-olds who were downloading the app. Actually, what you realize is that people do have smartphones. I don't know what the exact number is, but I'd say kind of 9 in 10 people probably have smartphones and use smartphones in a way that they download their apps, or they engage with kind of with brands or with loyalty programs, or whatever kind of programs they want to use. It goes right the way across, and we actually found we had an amazing engagement with older demographics as well. So from our learnings, again, it's making it simple, making it easy to use, making it relevant. And as long as it keeps that relevancy to the consumer will come back and use it again and again and again. Like you say, if the brands can be in front of that person then in the right moment, whether that was with Carling during the FA Cup football, or whether it was with Guinness during the Six Nations at the time. You could engage with the audience, you could influence them for a purchase, and we then see spikes in the sales. So yeah, I do think that we put a lot of consideration into Gen Z, but equally, I think it's just as important to recognize the opportunity that kind of gamification and the elements of gamification sits right across the board.
Yeah, we'll go into exactly how we use gamification to influence sales directly in that redemption piece in a little bit. But before we do, I think it's really interesting to talk about the Gen Z and the learning gamification platforms and how they're kind of most engaged in that side of stuff as well when it comes to kind of the traditional gamification side and on the learning platforms, not just the advert side as well.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the learning side of gamification is something that I've got a lot of experience with. So, you know, in my previous role, I worked for a children's healthcare app, which was just the whole purpose of that app was around use gamified experiences to teach children in hospital about the procedures they were going through. It was a lot of love by the owner of the company who had this idea, and it was actually the first clinical app approved for use in hospitals, and I believe now it's in quite a lot of hospitals in America. And it just shows that having this little gamification piece where they used to be given Word documents, which you can imagine be quite boring, to explaining them about what they're going through, is it doesn't have a big engagement rate, and people just don't read it. But when you create an app and put it in front of them with different ways to interact, different AR experiences, VR experiences, then they come away feeling like they've learned something and they're educated on it.
Yeah, similarly, we did a web-based interactive for a charity. It was a mental health charity for young people who were in care, and it was probably about 4 years ago we did this, and it was around this care charity wanting to see how the young people were feeling whilst they were in care, and at the time they were having to fill out this survey every week, and they were finding that I think it was only about 5% of these young people were doing it. So it was a real worry for them. They wanted to ensure that they could get these analytics through. So we just created this really simple way of them being able to express how they feel through the use of emojis. So all they did, went on there, they selected what emoji they felt like that week, whether it was sad, worried, scared, happy, and then they could track those feelings to see if there was a dip or if there was a peak. And they found that the engagement rate flew through the roof, because it was something that audience again is used to. It's something that they're used to engaging with. It's not a boring survey monkey or whatever it might be. It's something that they're used to engaging with, which was great to see, especially when you can do something that's giving back as well, which is always really nice. What would you say makes a successful interactive or game? And I think we can probably start to get into a little bit of the kind of real redemption side and the reward side here as well.
Well, I mean, yeah, we've touched on it already on the re-engaging side, about how it's important to keep that engagement with a user, hold their attention as long as possible. But the rewarding and as you mentioned, redemption side, I think is another key area, because you've got to really think about what's the reason for them playing the game. If it's got nothing to offer, it can be quite hard for people to pick it up. So the redemption piece is, I guess when it comes full circle, like, can they give the reward, which is a voucher, which is, a free item in a shop, wherever it might be. It's important to get these right and track those redemptions even after completing the game or interactive.
Yeah, and from my side, I'd say almost from one step back in terms of what kind of makes it successful. You obviously always start kind of with the end goal, or if you look at kind of, okay, what's the investment that goes into it? What are we looking at to drive ROI, or what is ROI of this? Is very often quite difficult actually to set KPIs, because you can look at, are we trying to drive reach? Are we trying to change behavior? Are we trying to pull in redemption? And I think the thing is, where the success comes from it is the understanding of what we can see, and actually the data that we get behind it. You can see, you can very quickly understand the number of people seeing it, the number of times your brand might be seen within that kind of interaction. You can then start to see, are people coming back? Or how long? What's the dwell time on these kind of on these games? How long are we in front of? Are the messages being seen and received? And then equally, like you say, I was then going into the redemption. So I think if I look at it in totality, it's really quite difficult to really explain what real true success is, because it's so dependent on as to what those kind of core KPIs are at the start. But I think the beauty of it is it's variable, and equally you can absolutely dial into 1, 2, or 3 kind of buckets in there, and you can work out what's the purpose that you're trying to do, and then equally you can bring the experience and the success backwards and say, actually, okay, look at what we have achieved at this game, and how many people are interacting, what's the reach been, how many people are then going in for collection or redemption, and then that's when you can really start to build out what the ROI looks like. But I think it's a very different platform in terms of ROI than I think you go into from maybe a traditional kind of marketing, or even if it's a leaflet drop or something like that. It's hard to engage and understand who those audience are and what's pulling people in. Whereas platforms online, they have the digital footprint, right? You can see where people are going, and that's what's really exciting.
Yeah, but it lives beyond the game, doesn't it? It lives beyond the interactive. It's the fact that we can get that data and then retarget them or remarket to them in the future, knowing what their behavior was with that, whether it was a game that lives within another app or whether it was a game that was native online. It's the fact that we can then use that data for future purposes as well. And it's not just the fact that we just go play this game and win a £2 voucher.
It lives beyond it. Our kind of a really successful campaign that we ran last summer with Jack Daniels. Jack Daniels has a family of brands, as in like flavors: apple, honey, fire. This isn't a plug for Jack Daniels, by the way, but we've got a great range, but equally not everyone understands or knows about them. So we did a piece of interaction of which we asked kind of several questions about do you like light nights or dark nights? Do you like going out in the day or in the evening? Do you like hot, cold? And basically what you can do is almost build out here is your perfect drink. So what we're doing is not only are we learning about the consumer, but the consumer's then learning about the brands and then understanding with themselves, well, this is saying this drink matches my personality. And there's a voucher for me at the end of it to go and redeem one in a local kind of pub. And that is so powerful to educate, is to engage, and then it's to drive people into maybe a venue. So naturally it supports the venues in taking people in, because they might not already be going in, or it might influence the going maybe once more than they normally would. And when they're there, they tend to obviously naturally you might buy more drinks or an extra drink, and equally it starts to build up their repertoire around our brands. So the power is absolutely there to really use this as a platform to hit so many different markers.
I think that leads us on to a perfect segue into integrations, because you've mentioned there kind of the brand side leading into pub or into venue, and how important integrations can be to that customer journey to ensure that it's seamless. I think in the past, we've had to do a game, they've had to get it emailed, and then you've got to print it out, and then it seems quite clunky, the experience does. I think now we've got, and I'm sure other agencies have this as well, but obviously with ourselves, we're integrating into over 90% of retailers, meaning that those POS systems, we can get your brand as long as it's being sold there. You can just get that, whether it's an SMS text, whether it's an email, whatever it might be, and just go directly into there. Oz, do you want to kind of talk us through what the perfect kind of journey from social advert all the way through to kind of redemption and beyond might look like, and why the integration is really important to kind of close that loop?
You've absolutely touched on it there. You've mentioned all the different parts of the process there, which, it ultimately starts with that social campaign, that social advert, which is a way to drive people into the interactive, which can be simple as like a QR code or, put a simple, rememberable domain name. But then once you've got someone in there, then it's about the first part is to get that data captured, after they've played the interactive, so we know who they are. But then it's that's the first touch point. They've started playing the game, they've interacted with the interactive. They've got through to the end, they've got some sort of reward. And in a normal world, like a few years ago, Adam, as you said, we would lose that and we wouldn't really know much about them anymore. We know, we're giving away X vouchers, but do we know who redeemed it, where they redeemed it? And I think now when people are going into shops with, like you say, 90% of retailers, we've got these POS integrations, and we can track that, and we can be like, okay, of the people that completed this game, got through to the end of the interactive, who got a voucher, 80% of these people then went on to redeem it, went on to keep purchasing more and more. And it's having the different touch points along the way. because you mentioned SMS notifications, push notifications. That's the reminder to set during the campaign. Here's your voucher. Oh, you've not redeemed your voucher in a week, and it's right up until the end of the campaign is run. You can send those notifications and beyond. Because once you've gone beyond it, you've got this information. It's how do you keep that customer engaged? Because it's not over when the campaign's done. It's just you've got that extra information, that extra data, which is so critical today.
And similarly on that, when you do see the data, the learnings from it are continual. And I think the opportunity to learn is something that, from brand side is quite difficult to kind of see. But, you can start to understand what the perfect journey looks like, from play-in to an issue to redemption. What's the kind of the timeline? What's the drop-off rates? Where can we influence, if it's like you say, if it's a push message and we know on average, anyone who doesn't redeem after 3 days is unlikely to redeem. So that's where we can use whether it's a burst of push messaging, SMS, that's when we can target those group of people and just remind them and try and give a second wind. If it was an email, you can do similar, but if it was a post or a drop in the mail, it's hard to do. You can't go and repeat after 4 days and think, oh, I'll send another one, because it's just not kind of viable. So actually you continually plotting and learning, and each campaign is very, very different, and you see and understand and learn those kind of different traits and habits, and you can be reactive and agile. And I think I've put on kind of the note here, they're the two biggest words for me from gamification: the ability to react to something, and then equally the ability to be agile and slightly change or tweak what it is you need to do. And I think what's equally important is building these amazing games. It's still really, really key to how do we make sure that people are seeing those games as well, and how can we make sure that we're hitting everyone and the audiences as best we can, not just about kind of understanding and learning, but you still need to drive those numbers as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, let's say we have built the best game in the world and that's there. If no one sees it, no one's going to play it. It's the same with anything, isn't it? And that's why it's really important. It's actually integrated into a full campaign. Creating a game isn't your campaign. Creating the game is almost a section within it. What methods have we found? And actually it comes back to a question that somebody's asked in the Q&A, which was, I guess, from one question here is, I've been trying to find new interactive ideas for RTM activations, including print, voucher adverts, and how to incorporate gamification. Do you think gamification has a place in RTM, and have you any tips on how to incorporate this into channel plans? Adam, you've had quite a few kind of experiences in that, and kind of going from print voucher all the way through to that, and that's obviously one channel to try and get people to play games that even I think we worked on something similar when you were at Green King together, but obviously it also integrates into the social, right across to social and PR and everything like that as well. And do you kind of want to cover off that question that we've had in from David there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I also look after wholesale as well, so we're having similar kind of conversations. But for us, this goes back to kind of the very original question around gamification itself and the touch points, because is it a game or is it an interactive, and is it about educating or is it about trying to drive a behavior? And I think with it all, funneling people into a place and space, whether it's a microsite, whether it's on your own sites, whether it's on a hosted site through the agency, driving people in is kind of one challenge. But then when they're there, is how do we make sure that the content has the relevance? And if there is elements of kind of gamification, yes, I 100% think it fits in that space and place. And I think it's about kind of interacting. What's the message that you want to land, and what's the best way? Is it about is it about building out kind of almost like a questionnaire to funnel it out to find out where your best deal is, or is it about is it from what can you help them to drive for the end consumer? So lots of different kind of options on it, but yeah, I just think it fits across so many different kind of levels. It comes back to like, what's the objective, where you're trying to drive, how can you interact, and then how can you learn from the interactions? Can you bring in the data into maybe a CRM system in which we can then, or you could, sorry, I'm working with you now all of a sudden, but you work within, you can create that data. Can you bring that into your CRM so then you can personalize your email campaigns to that are really relevant for that customer? And you can do that in a number of different ways. And I think working with Trunk has allowed us definitely to kind of explore that and really build out a really robust kind of ECRM program off the back of data. And I think that's what, again, helps us to always personalize the content as much as we can.
Yeah, just on that CRM integration piece, there's always the analytics, which are really important across all of this and how we track the users. But at TrunkBBI, we've done a lot of custom integrations across pretty much every CRM you can think of. So, we're ready to whatever it is you need to integrate with. We've got this in our system that can be customized per those reports.
I think just there's one when we touch on data, because there is the buzzword right around GDPR, which is always the scary point from a customer piece. Like, how do we make sure that we are always private and that the data is responsibly, whether it's shared or however we're doing it. But there's, again, the confidence that I took from kind of working on these processes allowed us to understand that, the agencies and customers, we kind of make sure that we are super adherent to all the rules, but equally I'm so confident that I know that we are compliant at all times, and that we bring in the data in a really safe way, and where it's stored and where it's shared is like I say, GDPR compliant, but equally safe for the consumer to feel, that end consumer to feel confident and comfortable to allow us to access their data. Because I think certainly from a brand point, data is all of a sudden, probably a few years ago, the word data became a little bit of a sketchy word, because we're a bit like, how can we collect it? What do we do with it? How do we store it? And I think, again, we're all evolving, but the confidence now is working as a collective, is make sure that we are always very compliant. But from that data, having the confidence then to go and land grab the data that you need, and to then personalize an offer and make sure that you're really, really kind of, that relevant, but you're always really personalized to the right consumer.
Absolutely. I think the thing with the data, and I think it probably goes on to maybe our kind of final point here before we get into more questions and answers. If anyone else has got any other questions, please feel free to drop them into the Q&A section. But let's say, we've gone through the process here. We've done the planning phase to find out the reason why we're doing this and what interactive we should be doing. We've put it on the right channels, whether that is through print or whether that's through social or PR or whatever that might be. It's hit all the KPIs. We've got an amazing game out there that loads of people have played, they've enjoyed. We've got a load of data. What now? And how do we make the most out of this to ensure that it doesn't just stop there?
So how do we make the most out of the data?
And to be able to retarget to them. And also, I also guess, with going back to Adam's point, is not just on the data, but also the learnings from that, to ensure that when we go back out with an interactive again, that we take some learnings from it and build upon it and improve on it.
Yeah, well, like you say, it's just all of it. It's taking that data, it's making sure it's compliant and understanding it. I think understanding it is the biggest piece here, because it's, what does it mean? It's enough to throw a lot of data at someone, but then it's really trying to make sense of it. And I think that's what we've done with a few different games we've done over the last few years. In that, when the next release of it, we've slightly tweaked it, made it and improved it to get a greater uptick. I think there's some examples we could talk about which we'll come on to at the end, on how we've increased redemption rates and and POS integrations as well.
Yeah, and from my side, I guess it doesn't always end at the end of that one campaign. I think when we've in the past kind of, or when we're building these games, we always kind of have that consideration as to how can this be repurposed, like how can the platforms be repurposed, whether it's in 3, 6, 9 months time. Is there tweaks to make? Is there visuals? But a lot of the time, the platforms themselves there's kind of a bit of a word that gets knocked about in kind of reskinning. And I know it's not always as simple as just changing the fonts on something, but actually the user journey is kind of creating a bit of that consistency from a user journey point of view. If we've got them once and they're interacting and they are engaged with a platform, it becomes kind of part of, you know, part of something that they've kind of experienced before. And you know, if you've got that right, and with slight tweaks, there's no reason why you can't get them to, you know, play again in 12 months time on the same or a very similar platform. We used a great game around Guinness and the Six Nations, you know, kind of a running man example up and down the pitch, or someone being chased. And actually we repurposed that 2 or 3 times over kind of 2 or 3 seasons. And we always continually saw numbers grow on top, because people love the game, they like the game, and actually almost creating something which is quite limited in a time period when people like to play. They actually are almost waiting for them to have the opportunity to play it again. And again, if there's slight prizes that come from it, or if there's, again, you can make the tweaks, learning from the data, learning where maybe the dropout rates might be, or where what is the perfect offer to really drive, what's the highest redeeming offer, then actually in the next iteration, you can upweight that highest redeeming offer. So you can drive your redemption rates higher, if that's what you're challenged with, and your choice is to try and get someone to actually go into a store or go into a shop or go into a pub. Then you can really focus on that, because you know that's your kind of sweet spot. We all know that offers have a sweet spot, whether they're 20% off, 40% off, whether they're buying up, you know, we always find that. So when we do, it gives us an ability from the learnings to actually project the next project a little bit and say, okay, let's really drive redemption rates, or actually let's upweight it during a down period that we might see, you know, off the back of a huge boxing fight on a Saturday night in a pub. Naturally, there's sometimes a bit of a hangover over a kind of 4 or 5 day period, because everyone's been out and had a great experience. So that's where you could hit that sweet spot to influence people to come in a little bit sooner. So I don't think you're right. It doesn't end at campaign. It doesn't end when the burst of social media is finished. It doesn't end when the game closes, because you take from it the learns, and then you start to develop what the next phase might look like.
Yeah, just to rewind a little bit onto, you mentioned the Guinness game there that we did a couple of years ago, and obviously continue to roll out for the Six Nations with Green King as well. And what's really interesting in a campaign like that is, through the season ticket app, we were already giving away vouchers, compared to when the reason redemption rate increases in such a large volume is because of I think we've done research on it over the years, and someone's 3 times more likely to want to redeem something that they've earned. I've used this example a few times, but for example, if I grabbed this coaster and said to you, Oz, let's play rock, paper, scissors for this coaster, and you won. If I just said to you, do you want this coaster? You'd probably say no. But if we played rock, paper, scissors for it, and you won the rock, paper, scissors, you'd probably put this in your bag because you've earned it. It feels like you've it's yours then. And it's exactly the same mentality when it comes to games, that if you want to give someone a 50% voucher, they'll be like, all right, cheers, everyone gets this. I'm not special. If they've actually played a little game, even if it's just for a minute or two, and they feel like they're different and they've actually earned that, they feel their mentality around it is, I need to go and redeem this because it's mine and I deserve this. So to go into a couple more of the questions here before we kind of move on, rather than leaving everything to the end, is the next one's curious to hear your thoughts on using gamified experiences for brand equity building versus short-term effects.
Yeah, it's a really good question, because naturally, but that kind of interruption/disruption is very much about brand in hand immediately. And I think what you want to do is kind of, and that is quite short term. It's kind of influence the behavior quite quickly, or at least drive a consideration. And I think, you know, it's I guess it's just one of the many ways in which, kind of from a marketing point, that you can get your brand in front, but it is probably driven at that kind of short term burst. But the ideal there is it's kind of lots of little bursts over periods of time, which start to drive the kind of the more of the longer term brand equity, if that makes sense. So you want to, those small constant interactions start to kind of create that mindset that, you know, it's there and it's regularly there, and you start to look out for it. And there's different levels of platforms that you then go about kind of make sure you're continually driving brand equity. So you're kind of, you know, if you're the Nike Just Do It, that's your brand equity. That's the logo that you see across everything on the billboards. But equally, they'll do short burst campaigns, whether they're a new line of clothes or trainer that is quite driven on that one product, but kind of there's always that nod to just do it right, and it just continually builds and builds and builds to create that bigger picture. So I do think this is very much a method kind of to interrupt in short, but equally to continually build those kind of that brand equity long term.
Yeah, and that's about ensuring that you're not just doing it once and turning it off, and ensuring that, going back to what we've discussed a couple of times, is learning from it and improving upon it. And the best and most engaged interactives and games that we've done is when it's just part of their always on activity, and it's part of their marketing mix. It's not just the fact that it's Christmas, let's do a game, and we're doing the game because it's seasonal. It's the fact that it's part of their marketing mix, and it's part of their plan to engage with other channels, and to ensure that it's the integration is part of everything that they're doing throughout the year. So I suppose the short term is, yes, you can get that data very quickly, you can get those peaks in interest, but also the long term has to come that it's continuously happening throughout the year, and it's not just a turn on turn off once a year time.
And that it still has that undercurrent of a link towards the bigger picture.
Absolutely. So do you have any advice on how to activate gamification in venue?
There's a few off the top of my head, and one that I can think of is it's that competition element when you're in venue, and we've done it with a few different ones now where we've had leaderboards across different games. Now, it's quite common to have a global leaderboard and everyone compete, and you want to get your score up on there, but in venue, getting people to do it is having leaderboard be relevant to the location that they're at as well. That's a really important way to keep people in where they are now. They want to revisit and they want to see, oh, is my top score still at this venue, or maybe travel somewhere else and try, I want to get it on multiple different ones. And it's that way of doing different location-based challenges in these different interactives, which can really help, especially, it's that competition element to the gamification.
Yeah, it's nice ways if you link it back to sport as well, being able to turn on the games at half time to make sure people are engaged, or doing it right before the end of the game to ensure that they've only got a 10-minute slot to get a discount, so people are going to the bar. And you can also turn things on and off to ensure that queue flows are everyone's not just going to the bar at a certain time. You can distribute it to certain people in the pub there, and then certain people in the pub, and using technology like RFID as well to be able to we've done quite a lot of stuff. It was actually an old agency that I worked at a long time ago now, was around RFID in theme parks, and also AR in theme parks as well. So actually being able to take your phone out and be able to scan in a certain thing with it, like a certain symbol around the theme park, to collect it's almost like a digital treasure hunt. So what they use that for is, right, this part of Alton Towers was too busy, so let's actually turn on these activation points to try and get people to be more free flowing around the park. And then when you collect a certain amount at the end, you got a certain discount in the shop, or you got discount off your next tickets. But when you put your phone up to this thing, it wasn't just a QR code that linked you somewhere. It was a beautiful big 3D model that came out, and you could interact with it and play a little game whilst you're actually in the venue itself. That's obviously a bit bigger than maybe what you could do in a pub, because Alton Towers is considerably bigger than your local boozer.
And I think just my only add-on to it is the ability to do something in the moment, and be your phone pings or your prize is readily available. I think sometimes, and going all the way back to 45 minutes ago, we said at the start, it's like that barrier to entry and that immediacy almost. You can do this. You can do an amazing game where you can win tickets to Australia, whatever you want to do. But that's kind of that long-term aspiration. But if there is that link to that immediacy as well, that spot prize in the moment, particularly from an in-venue point of view, it captures the audience, because a person, whether it's a hat or whether it's a free drink or whatever it can be, if it's in that moment, in that venue, it's really, really powerful, because people do want that kind of, it's the excitement of, rolling the dice, or I reckon it'll be the first goal scorer might be X, or whoever, whatever the kind of the challenge is. If you can in that moment interact, it forms part of the kind of the journey of the consumer, then it's a really great, powerful tool to kind of to, again, from a branding point, to have your brand in hand, but equally from a consumer point, which is the romantic part of this is all consumer driven, is to make them feel really good. And again, going back to kind of Adam's mum playing on Candy Crush, that smile on the face, and it's like the moment going, I've just won something brilliant, and the person next to him saying, well, I best have a go on that game, or I'll scan this, I'll scan the beer mat and I'll have a go on the flick stick game, or whatever it might be.
Absolutely. Just coming to another question here. So is there a high risk of saturation for gamification in a category? If 2 or 3 brands in the same space start gamifying offers, it might negatively impact the ROI of all games more severely than in the case of more traditional engagement tactics. Thoughts?
I mean, it's a good question, but I think from our experience, we've done a lot of gamification in a lot of similar markets, and I can't think of one that, even if it's been a similar market, where it's been decreased because a similar brand or similar market was doing the same thing. If anything, it's more engaging. People want to get involved more, especially if you go to, I think you mentioned it there, Adam, when you mentioned about scanning a beer mat. Someone goes into a pub and they can scan a beer mat or do a purchase, and that unlocks something. Then you go into another venue, you go into another location, you want that experience again. I think it helps gain people getting used to that reward, risk reward type engagement. And if I keep going back to pubs, but it's also in shops as well.
Yeah, it could. I believe it's got to a point where consumers expect this from.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm bound to say that. I lead an agency that create goes like this, but I believe consumers expect to be able to engage with a brand like this now, and those that aren't engaging with their consumers in this way are probably will start to fall behind because their competition already are. And if it's something that's not that the brand isn't doing, then they need to start looking at it quickly, because we're in 2023 and that's what consumers expect.
You mentioned
consumers will pick and choose what's relevant and right for them as well. I think if there was 2 competitions running very similar times, I think they have that opportunity and that luxury as well, that they can kind of pick and choose which is right for them. And I think that's where and equally, whether it's venues have their responsibility to be picking what's the right thing for my audience as well. So again, it's just opens the doors to so many more opportunities, really.
Yeah. One other question here is, we have a range of brands under our portfolio, some of which have smaller brand budget. Is it possible to use gamification with a limited budget, or is it better to focus on brands with a larger budget? Is it scalable? I can feel this. I can answer this question and say the suggestion on that with a smaller brand would be that you look at an agency who has their own IP and they sit on their own IP where they can reskin a game for you. So they've effectively already built the code and they can reskin that for a very cost-effective price. So yeah, that would be my recommendation. I know an agency that does that. They're called TrunkBBI. So if you do want to find out about our IP, we do sit on over 60 pieces of IP in different interactives, whether that is little spin to win mechanics or bigger games. It's certainly something that we can have a look at for you. So just going into kind of the final question here, and if anyone does have any other questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A before we wrap up. But I'd like to ask you what the best or your favourite game that you've been involved in, Adam, and then we'll move on to us. So what kind of springs to mind for you and the reasons why it was the best one that you've been involved in?
For me, I go back to kind of my first. The first game that we ran was 2017, 2018, I think, the Summer of Sport. And essentially what it was we had it must have been 2017. It was a non-World Cup or Euros year. Sport in pubs is huge in kind of summers. And in that particular summer, I think there was kind of the Netball World Cup, there was a Cricket World Cup. And essentially what we did is we created a game which incorporated lots of different sports all together. It was quite a simple kind of flick stick game. Brands kind of owned the spaces, whether it was Bud owning the women's football, whether it was I think Pims did the tennis, but essentially what it was our first real step into it in at the time. We hadn't really played in that space. We hadn't we hadn't interacted in the audience in that way. But what we learned from it was amazing. But equally, the game and the results and the KPIs, it drove kind of 200,000 plus plays over the summer. It interacted. The dwell time was kind of 5-6 minutes. The redemption rates at the time were kind of over 50%. And our learnings from that was just, it kind of, I guess, accelerated our journey into gamification and accelerated into interactions. And I think for me, we were really, really kind of like proud of the output, especially given it was kind of our first thing. So that one definitely sticks out in my mind.
Cool. Oz, yourself? How about yourself?
Yeah, no, there's a few, but I think one that really stands out, as we've been talking about it quite a lot today, and the full circle of integration with different touch points, is probably the Slim Chickens game, Christmas Impossible. I'm sure you remember it. It was where there was a Santa coming from the roof. It was a really simple concept, controlled just by a simple touch button. But the whole idea of the campaign was we wanted to encourage footfall over the Christmas period. And when you say that Santa falling from a ceiling in a Mission Impossible style game will increase footfall, you might be like, why would that increase footfall? But this is where the full circle integration comes into it. It's having the POS integrations, having the SMS reminder notifications when people sign up. And Adam, you'll remember the stats better than me, but I think based on the back of this, there was like an increase by 130% of voucher redemptions in the store. Yeah, and so it's quite a simple idea, quite a simple game, which we produced. Going back on, can small brands do it for small prices? It was a really small budget with a really big impact. It was such a good game to produce and work on. So yeah, that's probably one that stands out to me from the game side of it. Yeah.
Good stuff. And for myself, it's probably one that we actually reskinned for 2 other brands, but originally we did it for an insurance company, and they wanted to find out more about their audience. So it was actually finding out rather than going out to market with a market research piece, they actually invested in a avatar builder. So the user, they were a young person's driving car insurance company. So I think 17 to 24-year-olds. And we did a whole social campaign around it and PR campaign, but it was an avatar builder that you could get on there. What's your favorite music? What's your favorite food takeaway? What clothes? Where do you buy clothes? All that sort of stuff. But instead of it just being questions, it was building their own personal avatar. So at the end, they could share that avatar on social. If you share the avatar, you got put into a prize draw. But it was the fact that the data on the back of it was invaluable. They managed to find out about 10,000 people's purchase behaviors when they come up for renewal, everything like that. And the cost of being able to get that data maybe from a data house or a market research company would be more than what it costs them to do the game. But also on top of that, they've also, as I mentioned earlier, had that positive brand engagement as well. So they're already slightly warmed up as an audience, as well as being able to have all of that to be able to retarget them through email or through social. So that's certainly one of mine. The other one as well is just because it gave people an opportunity to slap politicians in the face with a fish, was our slap election for Paddy Power that we had to turn around in 4 days, because it was actually something we were going to just do for our own social, and then Paddy Power saw it and wanted to use it for themselves. So we kind of quickly put that up. That interactive got, I think it was something like, I can't remember the exact numbers. It was millions of plays within 48 hours. And it was during the snap election in whenever that was. I think we've had about 14 elections since then, certainly 14 different prime ministers. But it was when the snap election was called, and we did a game where you had to select your politician to hit them around the face with a fish, and you could go around, and then there was a live counter. So every single time a politician got hit with a fish, it would add a score, almost like Sky Sports News at the bottom. So everyone's interactions were all going into one database, and they were all going up live. It was great just to see that go live and watch the counters just increase, and see who the most hated people were in the country and where they were most hated. Because at the beginning, you could see, you had to select where you were in the country, and then on the back of that, you could obviously do great PR pieces as well. And that's probably something that we've not touched on so much today. Maybe we can leave that for a different day. But actually using gamification and using interactors incentives as part of your PR mix, and actually be able to create that data so that you actually get a headline on the back of it. We did a great thing for Nextbase where we asked certain questions and it felt like you were playing a game, whereas actually what we were doing was we were trying to find out information from those, so we could say 92% of people in the UK don't know X, and it actually creates an amazing PR story. So we'll leave that one for next time. There were no other questions in the Q&A. I think it's been great to have a chat today, and hopefully everyone's enjoyed it as much as I have. You can find myself on LinkedIn if you do want to get in contact. We will follow up with this session with a couple of leave behinds. Those leave behinds are the first document will be around the importance of doing planning and strategy and how you do that planning and strategy before going into gamification. The other one is a bit about what we've spoken about today. So some of those stats around the redemption, what that closing the loop looks like, and a little bit about TrunkBBI as well. So as long as we're all finished here, I'll thank you for your time, and we'll see you all soon. Thanks, Oz. Thanks, Adam.